For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Suey. I'm the worship arts leader here at Old Fort Church, and we're going to do something a little bit different this morning. We're in a series called Bible Battles. We've been looking at some physical battles through Scripture, some spiritual battles through Scripture, and how God has intervened and worked in those situations. But this morning, we're going to hear some personal stories from people that sit around you every Sunday. We're going to hear their stories. Battles that they've been through, and maybe some are still going through, and hear their personal testimony of how God has worked and intervened in their lives. So instead of our normal message this morning, why don't you sit back and check out these stories.
I'm Mary Franks. I've been a part of Old Fort Church for 14 years maybe. It feels like home. We've been here a long time. I've been a midwife for 16 years. I spend a lot of time meditating on the midwives in Exodus. And in Exodus, the Lord tells us that because Shiphrah and Puah loved God and they served him above Pharaoh and did what was right in the sight of God, he gave them families of their own. So I've held on to that promise and sought to hear from him. And my prayer is that I would hear him when he's whispering, so he never has to shout at me. I want to hear that small voice. And I wanted to share with you an experience that I had a few years ago in this one particular situation. I was called in to help a couple that I had never met before, and all I knew was that they loved the Lord and they were in labor having their first baby. When I got the call, I heard the Lord say, "Please just be willing." And so I went. When their baby finally did come, he didn't want to breathe. And at that moment, the training kicks in. My hands were doing all of the things that they were trained to do. And I'm praying, everyone in the room is praying, and we were just waiting on the Lord. Dad reached down to the side of the bed and he picked up his Bible and he opened it to Genesis 2. And he read over his son. God created man out of the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. And as he spoke those words, his boy inhaled the breath of life, and he opened his eyes and looked at his mother, and that boy is a thriving and healthy boy who is being raised in the wisdom of the Lord, and they are just glorifying the Lord with their lives, as all of us can seek to do. And it's been on my heart for a long time to share that over and over I've been privileged to see the Lord move in miraculous ways like that. That was one of the moments that has changed me. And there's no way to explain it other than the Lord came in and came into that room and touched that child.
My name is Jenna Quinter, and I'm going to be sharing my story today, just about my journey through fear and anxiety. Most of y'all are, go to this church, and y'all probably knew me growing up and knew that, I was a shy kid. Just kind of growing up, I really lived in fear, I guess. I wasn't, bold. I was super timid and all of that. But it wasn't really until, after I had really come to know Christ, I read a book called Live Fearless by Sadie Robertson, and she just kind of talked about, talked about her own journey with fear and how the Lord had freed her from that. And it really challenged me and made me realize how much I lived by fear and how much it controlled my life. I would say no to things because I was scared, or I wouldn't go and talk to people because I was scared, and I'm not trusting God. And so that kind of started my journey, I guess. There was one point I was just praying to God, and I was like, God, is it always going to be like this? Am I just going to have to be terrified to do anything? And I just remember the Lord saying to me, Jenna, you are not helpless. And I held on to that for years. A few years later, I was on a mission trip the summer before I was a senior. Just that whole year before it had gotten, I think, a lot worse than it was before, just being like anxious a lot. And I was really discouraged by it because I was like, as time goes on, it's supposed to get better, not worse. And I was on this mission trip and I was going into it thinking, all right, like, this is going to be a spiritual high. Like, I'll be better. Like, this is going to be great. And I get there, I'm like so anxious the whole week, like worse than I'd ever been. And I was like, what in the world is happening? Like, this is supposed to be my like mission trip high. Like, why am I just feeling like this? And I was just so upset about it. The whole week, my youth pastor, Matt, was asking me, like, hey, do you want to lead worship? And I was like, no. Like, after that happened, I was like, okay, like, first step, if I'm actually giving this to God, if I'm serious about this time, I need to actually do what I'm scared of and trust him. And so it was like the last night, I think, I walked out with my guitar with one other girl who was going to like do the worship with me. And I was like, Matt, we're going to lead worship today. And he's like, okay. And so like we did it. And I was so scared. I was only like 15, maybe 20 people, but I was terrified. And I say that because, I've had the privilege this past year at my school, Cedarville, to be on like a worship team. And we got to lead worship in chapel. And there's about like 3,500 people maybe in chapel. And I remember like the last time we were doing it, just kind of like standing on the stage, we're singing How Great Is Our God, which is just like perfect for it. But I was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. Like how did I even get here? Like this is wild. Like only God could have done that. Cause like I went from being like scared to even like talk to people my own age and to like doing that. I don't know. It just blows my mind. And I wanted to share that just because like I know that there's a lot of people who struggle with fear and struggle with anxiety. I completely understand that struggle, but I wanted to share this story just to say that like you're not helpless, like there is hope, and that I 100% believe that anyone, no matter what level of fear or anxiety you're struggling with, anyone can be freed from it. And there's a verse, Psalm 34:4, I think, that says, I sought the Lord and he answered me and he delivered me from all my fears. You know what? Like people got to know that like there's hope and like they're not alone and that like God can free them from that.
Hi, I'm Ronda Krotzer. I'm a child of God. My husband and I got married and I wanted children. I could not get pregnant. We both were tested several times and there was nothing wrong with either one of us, so we ended up adopting 2 children. And for me begging God for children, I ended up with 7 grandchildren and I now have 21 great-grandchildren, helping raise my 3rd generation, so God did give me children. My youngest granddaughter got RSV when she was 7 months old, and she had been a preemie, so she was in the hospital a couple months when she was first born. The doctor sent her to the pulmonologist in Toledo, and she was there like 2 hours, and her lungs totally collapsed. As soon as I could get up there to see her, we went in, and she had tubes coming out of her lungs on both sides. She had catheters. She was intubated, and it was terrifying. The nurses told us we could not touch the baby. And I had my daughter with me. We just stood there and cried, and I felt like, okay, I've got to get this baby baptized. And at the point of time there was nobody available to baptize the baby. And I knew as a nurse, if I needed to baptize somebody, I could. So I got some water and asked God's blessing on it, and baptized her then. And it just felt so much better to think that she was baptized. And then not too long after that, the doctor came in and he said, why aren't you touching that baby? She needs your touch. So after that, we were allowed to touch her. But she was there 7 months, and during this time, my daughter and the baby's father had some bad times. He beat her up very badly, and I had to get her to safety, but the house was just covered in blood. He went to jail, and then she went into a home to help her, but in the meantime, I'm still trying to go back and forth to the hospital while I'm working full-time. After the 7 months, the only place that would take her, like a nursing facility, was on the other side of Cleveland. So my husband and I decided we would take her home with us. And she was with us 7 months. She was on a vent at our house. We had to have 2 vents in the house. We had to have our electricity all done to take care of those. First night she was home, the vent broke down. So my husband and I stood there with an ambu bag till the respiratory therapist could get there from Toledo. So that was the big scare to begin with too. And then another time that I had to call out to God while we had her at our house was I was in bed upstairs, far enough away that I probably shouldn't have heard anything going on. I heard this gurgling, and I jumped up and went downstairs, and my daughter had fallen asleep. The tubing was full of water. If she would have rolled over, she would have drowned. And to me, I'm sure God is the one that woke me up. I cannot believe that I would have ever heard it otherwise. That's where my faith is from. God has just been with me. You know, I've had a rough life through different circumstances, but God has always been with me. And I hope whoever's listening to this finds Christ in their life.
My name is Jeff Fuhre. I live in Tiffin, Ohio. I was walking through the convent at St. Francis over in Tiffin, and I come across this guy that was over by the statue of Mary. And he started talking to me about the American Pope, and he's telling me some strange things. And I thought to myself, well, you know, maybe I should tell him about Jesus, because he didn't say anything about Jesus at all. And usually when I witness to somebody, what I do is I like the verse, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except for through me. That's what Jesus said. So when I told him that, he said, oh, Jesus said that. But what he said was, he said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. And he said something like this. He said, if Jesus comes back a second time, would you crucify him again? And it kind of surprised me. I never heard that question before. And I thought, well, that's not going to happen. And I said, what? And all of a sudden, he went from a 0 to 100% yelling at me and screaming. I've been a Christian since the 70s, and I've never seen anybody go from 0 to 100 like that. That was quick. And when he did that, this calmness came across me. And all of a sudden, if I had any anxiety or any fear, there was none. He kept saying, that's a yes or no answer, that's a yes or no answer. And I wanted to explain to him that Christ, when he comes back, it's not going to be, you can't crucify him, see? It's not going to happen that way. And so with that calmness, and there's no fear, I kind of said, I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, calm down. Of course, that didn't help. I think he couldn't get any louder. And he started calling me a liar and all kinds of stuff. And he said, you're on sacred ground. You got to leave and all this stuff. And I said, hey, listen. I said, nobody's going to crucify Christ when he comes back. And he wouldn't let up. He kept yelling. And I said, listen, the answer's no. And as he's leaving, he's yelling and screaming at me. He said, you got to leave. You got to leave. This is sacred ground. And I said to him, I said, well, this is not sacred ground. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. I said, I will come back. He said, you don't come back here. You don't. And that's this. That's what happened. But the thing that really got to me was how calm I was. I just couldn't believe how that feeling. And what I was thinking about was the armor of God. That's what happened to me. And that has never happened to me before.
I'm Debbie Hudson, and we're here to share a story that happened several years ago.
Well, it was April 1st, 1991, and it was 2-something in the morning.
I received a phone call from my sister saying she thought there had been a family emergency. So this would have been in Toledo, where she wanted me to ride with her. So I got myself out of bed and I asked Dave if he wanted to go with me, since it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And he just kind of rolled over and said, no, go ahead, you've got this. And so I got up, got ready, and as I did, something inside me kept saying, Dave needs to go. And so I got ready, trying to hurry, of course, thinking an emergency. And when I went back in the room a second time, I said, Dave, I kind of think you should go with me. And he kind of rolled to the other side and said, yeah, go ahead, you've got this. And I said, well, okay. So this time I went all the way out to the car and got in the car, and I can vividly remember holding onto the steering wheel and feeling as though I just couldn't move. And again, this small voice said, Dave needs to go with you.
She knew that I needed to go with her.
So I went back in the house and I said, listen, I don't know why, but I literally cannot move. You really do need to go with me, I feel like. And he said, okay.
Ended up that she several times came in the house trying to wake me up and get me to go with her, and I kind of hesitated and finally gave in.
So he got up, he got ready. We told our oldest daughter she would be in charge, and of course they were all sleeping. So then we headed out to Lindsay, where my sister lived, and we drove through Lindsay, which was just absolutely normal. And after that, Dave dropped me off at my sister's, and we jumped in the car and headed to Toledo.
I dropped him off, turned around, and headed back home through Lindsay. It looked like fog had set in to the town, and it wasn't there when we went 5 minutes earlier through it. And so as I got close to downtown Lindsay, I saw a glow in the sky and looked down a side road where I thought that glow was coming from, and it was a house. The attic was totally engulfed in flames, and I thought, there's no fire trucks here, there's no policemen, there's nothing going on, so somebody could be in that house. There was cars in the driveway. I could see that the living room light was on, so I parked in the road and I ran up to the door, and it was unlocked, and I opened it and just started yelling, and a man came running down the hallway. It was a ranch style, maybe a 3-bedroom house. Came running down the hallway, disoriented, coughing a little bit. When I went in, the smoke from the attic had worked its way down to where it was about waist high to the ceiling. And he started getting his bearings, and he said, what's going on? I said, your house is on fire. You got to get out of here. And is there anybody else in the house? And he said, yes, my wife and my 2 boys. And I said, well, show me where the bedrooms are, and you get your wife and I'll get the 2 boys. And so it was a short hallway down, and he got his wife, I got the 2 boys, woke them up. We got out of the house. By the time we were exiting the house, the smoke was total down to the floor, and you couldn't see the front door. You could feel the cold air sucking the smoke out the door. And so I was the last one out of the house, and believe it or not, the smoke alarm started going off as I exited the house, and really it was a lost cause at that point. And so we got out in the road. The younger brother ran to a neighbor's and called for the fire department, and they got there in a short time. We just gathered, and the family was, emotional and thinking about things that they lost, and I shared with them that, things can be replaced. I know some memories can't necessarily, but the important thing that was that your life was saved, and you lived to tell about it. And so that's what we're here for today. And I just gathered them in the road, and we prayed, and the fire department showed up. It got to a point where there was so many people that I just decided I needed to go home, and my kids were at home without me and without Deb. So I got real emotional driving home. It was written up the next morning in the paper, News Messenger out of Fremont, and it was a story about the fire and some of the details, and it was titled "Local Hero Saves Family," and but I wrote an editorial the next day, and I just shared briefly that God had me in the right place at the right time. It could have been anybody. So I said that the glory goes to God in the article, and then that was pretty much all of it.
Then, fast forwarding, 14 years later, we were at a church in Fort Seneca, Ohio.
I was the pastor of Fort Seneca Church for about a year.
And while we were there, the Boy Scouts came in regularly to use the facility. So we were there and wanted to meet them and introduce ourselves. And we had several people from the church say, "Oh, you don't need to do that. Go ahead and go. They're used to coming here." And we just were like, "No, we want to meet the guys." So we stayed, and it was an extra probably 40 minutes and waited for them to come. And when they came in, the boys came in, the leaders came in, and Dave introduced himself. "Well, I'm Dave, and this is my wife, Debbie Hudson."
And then one of the scout leaders said, "What'd you say your name was?"
And Dave said, "Dave Hudson and Debbie." And he said, "You saved my life." And so here, all those years later, we ran into Pat.
Hi, my name's Pat Randall, and we were involved in the fire on April 1st, 1991. I honestly don't remember much of what happened that day. I still don't. It's a very traumatic experience. We were blessed to have Dave and Debbie and God calling them that day. I used to just call what happened luck. It was a lot more than luck. When you hear the whole story and all that God did that day, and we're so blessed. Even in tragedy, God's always working. He's always there. It takes a while to understand it sometimes. But all those years later, in a scout meeting, I ran back into him again. I don't even remember if I met Debbie before that, honestly. And it was just to have them back in our lives again. It was an amazing moment. And I don't know if they realize that or not, but. And then when my son became Eagle Scout, I had Dave come and do his prayer at the ceremony. That was just a great honor for my family, and they've just been such great people in our lives, and I know God has a lot to do with that, and I'm just so grateful. Like I said, it's just, things came out of that. My brother became a fireman because of that. And he saved countless people's lives in his job, and it's just, that was a blessing too. And God will bless you in ways that you can't even imagine, and it's a hard story to tell, but it's just, you just look at it, and some days just are amazed at what God will do in your life.
I don't think it was a mistake. I don't think it was by accident. I think it was God-driven.
Life goes on, but God has a plan. Amen.